Madeline Grace Williams had always known how to make beauty out of brokenness. She was the kind of woman who found meaning in the mundane, folding laundry with reverence, journaling her dreams with careful strokes, and memorizing recipes whispered by her late grandmother. Raised in a quiet cul-de-sac in Connecticut by a single mother battling rheumatoid arthritis, Madeline learned the art of survival early. Her father had vanished before her first birthday, and with each hospital visit, she vowed never to let bitterness take root. She wasn't flashy. In fact, her life was a patchwork of simple joys: a second-hand bookshelf, a dusty acoustic guitar she never learned to play, and an old ambition to start her own home-cooked meal delivery service someday. But life, she knew, wasn't about rushing dreams, it was about tending them. By 26, she had become a diligent mid-level accountant at a tax firm, respected for her honesty and work ethic, though often overlooked in rooms filled with louder ambition. Her world shifted on a rain-slicked October evening during a cancer awareness fundraiser hosted at Yale's alumni atrium. Madeline, volunteering at the silent auction desk, was restocking flyers when she first met Daniel Ethan Campbell. He wasn't exactly charming in the traditional sense. Dressed in a tailored gray suit with the stiff posture of someone too used to boardrooms, Daniel struck her as distant, maybe even arrogant. But something flickered behind his guarded eyes when he dropped his program and she handed it back with a smile. Daniel was a finance analyst from Boston, with a career most envied and a past he rarely spoke of. His mother had died when he was 12 from ovarian cancer, hence his reason for attending the event, and his father had vanished into a gambling addiction shortly after. Raised by his no-nonsense Aunt Meredith, Daniel grew up learning to solve things with logic, not love. Emotions made him uncomfortable. Vulnerability, even more so. But when Madeline asked if he needed a raffle card, he chuckled, a genuine laugh that surprised them both. That night, neither of them knew the universe had just shifted. After the event, Daniel offered to walk Madeline to her car, despite the drizzle. They stood outside for 38 minutes talking about everything from his obsession with old-school wristwatches to her mother's declining health. She told him about her journal, how she called it Grace Notes, where she wrote about healing through food and words. He listened more than he spoke, but for a man who wore silence like armor, that meant something. As they parted ways, he awkwardly offered her a business card instead of asking for her number. She smiled, folded it into her purse, and said, "Maybe I'll call when I finish dreaming." He didn't expect her to. But 3 days later, when he received an email from her thanking him for the walk and attaching a scanned copy of a handwritten recipe for homemade butternut soup, he realized something strange had happened. He wanted to see her again. And that terrified him more than anything. The second time Madeline saw Daniel, it was at a bookstore downtown, an old shop nestled between a Thai takeout and a flower stall, known more for its dusty shelves than for popularity. She was flipping through a collection of personal essays on grief when she heard his voice behind her. "Didn't think you'd be into something that heavy," he said, half smiling. He'd come for a rare edition of a finance history volume he collected but ended up buying her the book instead. They walked out with paper bags in hand and sat on a nearby bench under falling yellow leaves. He asked about her journal again, then surprised her by remembering the exact quote she'd written in the email: "Healing doesn't always scream, sometimes it simmers." Their connection deepened in unspoken ways. It wasn't fireworks or flirty tension, it was something gentler, slower. A connection forged in quiet understanding. Neither of them knew it then, but this was how love would begin, not in a storm, but in silence. Their third meeting was anything but ordinary. Madeline's mother, Eleanor, had collapsed at home, and she rushed her to St. Vincent's ER in the middle of the night. It was raining again. New England's fall seemed determined to reflect her turmoil. Out of sheer desperation, she called the one person she knew wouldn't ask unnecessary questions, Daniel. He arrived within 20 minutes. He didn't ask why she called him. He didn't offer false hope. He just sat beside her in the cold ER lobby and handed her a granola bar from the vending machine. That night, as Eleanor stabilized and was admitted, Daniel remained. He canceled a 9 a.m. pitch meeting and even offered to help Madeline fill out hospital paperwork. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked him softly, her eyes rimmed red from hours of tears. He looked at her then, not with pity, but with a softness that almost startled her. Because I know what it feels like to watch someone slip away. And be helpless. That was the night she stopped seeing him as just a reserved finance guy. That was the night she let her guard down. In the weeks that followed, their relationship evolved into something that danced between friendship and something more intimate, though neither dared to name it. Late-night texts became routine, messages filled with links to TED Talks, music playlists, and snapshots of Daniel's coffee mugs with quotes scrawled on napkins. He opened up slowly, like a man learning a language he was never taught, vulnerability. Madeline shared more of her world, her mother's gradual improvement, her dreams of launching Grace meals one day, and her unspoken fear of being left behind. Daniel responded with stories of his boarding school years, his favorite aunt's strict rules, and how he had taught himself to smile in meetings without feeling anything. Alongside them, their closest friends entered the story. Emery Hart, Madeline's razor-sharp college roommate who worked in aviation HR, with a chaotic love life and a love for lavender tea. And Gregory Knox, Daniel's cynical but fiercely loyal best friend since high school, who secretly rooted for Daniel to find someone who would shake his walls loose. Together, they formed the earliest constellation of a story that was just beginning to unfold, one neither of them could predict, and both were quietly afraid to lose. It had been 13 months since Madeline and Daniel first met, and while the pace of their love was slow, it was deliberate. Daniel was the kind of man who didn't rush emotion. Everything with him was intentional, weighed, and carefully placed like numbers on a ledger. But even he couldn't deny that Madeline had become his safe place, a harbor he never thought he deserved. After a long week of missed calls and delayed dinners due to work demands, Daniel asked her to meet him at the Willowbrook Botanical Garden on a Friday afternoon. It was early spring, and the skies were gray with an impending drizzle. Madeline wore a pale green trench coat, her curls tied up loosely, unaware of what was about to unfold. They walked among the tulips, their hands brushing but never quite locking. Just as the rain began to fall in soft whispers, Daniel stopped near the arched wooden bridge, his voice shaking as he turned to her and asked, "Do you believe in forever?" She smiled, confused, but before she could reply, he pulled a small box from his coat pocket, knelt down on the wet stone path, and opened it with trembling hands. Madeline stood frozen, her heart racing in chaotic rhythms that even her anxious mind couldn't control. For someone who had always feared disappointment, this moment felt too surreal to trust. Was this really happening? Daniel, logical, careful, distant Daniel, was proposing? She stared down at the ring, a vintage rose gold piece with an aquamarine stone, not flashy but deeply meaningful, reflecting everything she loved about him. "Madeline Grace Williams," he said, eyes locked on hers, his voice unusually raw, "I don't know how to be perfect, but I know how to choose. And I choose you. Not for a season. For every fall and every spring." The rain picked up, soaking through their coats, but she didn't care. She dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered, "I've always wanted to be chosen." The moment wasn't extravagant. There were no cameras, no flowers, no crowd. Just the earth, the rain, and two imperfect people choosing to walk into uncertainty, together. Later that night, Madeline sat on her bedroom floor, her mother asleep in the next room, tracing the contours of the ring while her thoughts spiraled. It was then that she allowed herself to remember everything, her childhood without a father, her mother's quiet endurance, the years of burying herself in numbers because emotions felt dangerous. And now, here she was, engaged to a man who felt just as fragile in his own way. In a quiet moment, she pulled out her journal, Grace notes, and scribbled, "He knelt in the rain and gave me a future I never dared to dream of. But I fear what the rain may wash away." Meanwhile, miles away in his condo, Daniel sat alone with his whiskey, staring at a photo of his mother he kept in his drawer. He whispered, "I hope I don't ruin her." Even in happiness, a shadow loomed. The engagement was real, the love was genuine, but so were the fears both carried into it. Lake Geneva glistened like molten silver beneath a cloud-dappled sky as guests gathered under a linen-draped pavilion for what would be remembered as both a breathtaking and curiously intense wedding. Madeline stood behind the curtain, heart pounding beneath her ivory lace gown. It wasn't the nerves most brides felt. She was terrified of what this new chapter might ask of her. Her mother, Eleanor, fragile but radiant in a lavender shawl, reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're walking into a life, not just a man," she whispered. Outside, Daniel stood stoically in a navy blue tuxedo, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, as though waiting for a part of him to give out. The officiant was an old literature professor Daniel admired, and the ceremony was brief but poetic. "To choose someone daily," the professor said, "is the rarest vow of all." As Madeline approached down the aisle, her gaze fixed on Daniel's, she felt both peace and a deep-rooted tension, as though the universe was holding its breath. The reception was grand but tastefully so. Emery, stunning in a satin bronze dress, delivered a maid-of-honor speech that danced between humor and subtle warnings. "Madeline doesn't wear her pain on her sleeves," she said into the mic, "but don't think she hasn't carried any. She's the strongest woman I know, please don't forget that." The room gave polite applause, but Madeline noticed the flicker in Daniel's eyes. Gregory gave a toast too, lean, sharply dressed, and ever observant. "Marriage isn't a spreadsheet," he said, raising his glass with a wry smile. "It's chaos with rhythm. You either dance or you drown." Daniel chuckled for the crowd, but Madeline sensed the tightness in his jaw. Later, while alone near the dock with her veil fluttering in the lake breeze, Daniel came up behind her and pressed his forehead to hers. "You still want this?" he asked. "I want you," she replied. "But I need to know if you want all of me, even the parts that can't be fixed with numbers." He didn't answer immediately. That silence, she would later reflect, was its own kind of answer. That night, in the honeymoon suite of the Lakeside Inn, the newlyweds sat side by side in matching robes, eating leftover wedding cake with plastic forks. There was laughter, real laughter, as Daniel teased her about dancing offbeat during their first dance, and she playfully shoved icing on his nose. But as the laughter faded and they both settled into the quiet, Daniel sat back and stared at the ceiling. "I don't know if I'll be good at this," he said softly. Madeline turned toward him, studying the man she'd just vowed forever to. "Marriage isn't about being perfect," she replied, "it's about being present, even when it's hard." Daniel kissed her gently, but his hand trembled slightly. Somewhere deep within him, old shadows stirred. For now, they were buried beneath the weight of ceremony and champagne, but they would not stay silent forever. The wedding was a promise, yes, but it was also a gamble. And neither of them fully understood what was at stake. The first year of marriage was supposed to be a canvas of discovery, of two hearts finding rhythm. But for Madeline, it felt more like a long hallway of closed doors. Daniel's work life became all-consuming, each week bringing a new client crisis or quarterly target. He left before sunrise and often returned after midnight, exhausted and mechanical. When he was home, his eyes were usually fixed on glowing spreadsheets or the Bloomberg ticker crawling across the bottom of the TV. Madeline, meanwhile, struggled to juggle her own job at the firm, the responsibilities of being a new wife, and caring for her ailing mother, whose condition had begun to deteriorate more rapidly. She tried to reach out, left love notes in his briefcase, cooked his favorite shrimp linguine every Friday, even bought tickets to a jazz night downtown. But he canceled, over and over. "I'm doing this for us," he would say, without looking up from his screen. But it didn't feel like us anymore. The cracks became visible on what was supposed to be their first anniversary, a date Madeline had etched into her mind like scripture. She had booked a modest weekend cabin 2 hours outside Boston, prepped a small photo album of their first year, and even bought him a leather travel wallet engraved with his initials. But Daniel forgot. Not just the trip, he forgot the date entirely. He came home late that night with Thai takeout and didn't notice the candle she had set, the wine bottle already opened, or the handwritten card by his empty plate. When she finally whispered, "Happy anniversary," he blinked like a man waking from a dream. "Is that today?" was all he said. The apology was brief, obligatory. She didn't cry in front of him. Instead, she took the wine, walked to the bedroom, and stared at her reflection for a long time. Emery called later that night, and Madeline lied, said it had been quiet but meaningful. But the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was a warning bell no one seemed to hear. Even their friends began to notice the shift. Emery, ever intuitive, saw how Madeline's smile faltered just a second too late and how Daniel barely touched her waist in photos anymore. Gregory, who had grown surprisingly fond of Madeline's warmth and candor, cornered Daniel after a group dinner one night. "She's slipping away from you," he warned. Daniel had shrugged it off. "She's fine. Just stressed about her mom." But Gregory wasn't convinced. "You look at strangers with more attention than you do at your wife, Daniel. Don't mistake her silence for contentment." But Daniel brushed him off, just as he brushed off everything lately that wasn't tied to numbers or profit margins. At home, Madeline wrote less in her journal, cooked fewer dinners, and began sleeping on the far edge of the bed. She wasn't leaving, she was fading. And Daniel, blinded by ambition and pride, didn't even notice. Not yet. But soon, the distance between them would become impossible to ignore. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Madeline stumbled upon something that didn't sit right. She had been searching through Daniel's office drawer for a pack of sticky notes to label bills when her fingers brushed a thin manila envelope buried beneath stacks of trade magazines. Inside were receipts, sessions from a private therapist billed to a name she didn't recognize but traced back to Daniel's business card. She blinked, confused. There had been no mention of therapy, no confession about needing help or struggling. He had never brought it up during their late-night silences or their brief, tired dinners. The invoices dated back over 9 months. Madeline sat on the edge of his office chair, the paper trembling in her hands. If he was hurting, why didn't he tell her? Or worse, was this not about him at all? Her thoughts spiraled with questions that had no answers. She returned everything exactly as she found it and quietly closed the drawer. But something in her heart clicked that day, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, revealing a picture she wasn't ready to see. Instead of confronting Daniel directly, Madeline found herself turning more frequently to the company of an unexpected friend, Mr. Aldridge, a retired widower who lived 3 doors down in their townhouse block. He was in his late 60s, with a limp in his left leg and a kindness in his voice that made conversations with him feel like letters from an older, wiser version of the world. She had once helped him carry groceries, and since then, he often waved from his porch or offered her baked scones on difficult days. On one evening walk, she confided vaguely that she felt like a ghost in her own marriage. Mr. Aldridge didn't pry. He simply said, "Sometimes, the people we love forget we're human too. Not because they don't care, but because they've started seeing us more as furniture than fire." That sentence lodged itself deep in Madeline's chest. He spoke of his late wife, Beatrice, and how he almost lost her once because he believed success mattered more than shared mornings. "I got her back," he whispered. "But I was lucky. Most men don't get second chances." Madeline went home that night more torn than ever. Was Daniel hiding pain or hiding from her? As the weeks dragged on, Daniel's behavior continued to confuse her. At work events and in social spaces, he was charismatic, generous, and quick to laughter. He bought his assistant concert tickets, remembered Gregory's sister's birthday, and complimented strangers in elevators. But at home, his warmth evaporated like steam on cold glass. He barely touched her unless it was obligatory. He barely asked about her mother anymore, though Eleanor had been in and out of urgent care 3 times that month. He hadn't even noticed when Madeline changed her hair. It was as if the man she married only existed outside their shared front door. She started waking earlier, leaving posted affirmations to herself on the fridge. She began eating dinners before he came home. She even started hiding her journal. The quiet between them wasn't the comfortable kind anymore. It had turned hollow, a vacuum of unmet needs and buried truths. Madeline kept hoping the silence would eventually speak. But what she didn't realize was that Daniel had already chosen who he wanted to speak to, and it wasn't her. The first time Madeline heard the name Lila Moreno, it was in passing during a phone conversation Daniel was having on speaker while shaving in the bathroom. "Lila's sharper than most of the team," he had said with a chuckle. "Give her 2 weeks and she'll be running circles around half the floor." Madeline had paused outside the door with a laundry basket in her arms, caught off guard by the tone in his voice. It wasn't just admiration, it was warmth and ease she hadn't heard in months. She didn't question him directly, though. Daniel had become more defensive lately, especially when she brought up his office or schedule. "Don't micromanage me," he once snapped when she asked why he hadn't responded to her texts the night before. Still, something about the way he said Lila's name lingered in her mind, subtle yet persistent, like a sliver of glass beneath the skin. Something had shifted. And though she didn't know what yet, she could feel it. 2 weeks later, Madeline was invited to a corporate charity mixer hosted by Daniel's firm. It was rare for her to be included in his work events anymore, so she pressed her curls, wore her emerald satin dress, and arrived hopeful, even excited, to finally spend a night in his orbit again. The venue was stunning, all glass ceilings and champagne towers, but Daniel wasn't at the entrance to greet her. She wandered past clusters of suited men and elegantly dressed women, finally spotting him near the open bar. He was laughing, actually laughing, at something a young woman in a red backless dress had just whispered in his ear. Madeline's breath caught when Daniel turned, placed a hand gently on the woman's arm, and said, "Lila, you are dangerous." The woman's laugh was confident, flirtatious. When Madeline approached, Daniel barely flinched. "Oh, Maddie, this is Lila Moreno, my firm's newest golden girl. She's practically carrying the department already." He didn't kiss her. He didn't offer her a drink. For the first time in her life, Madeline felt like a stranger wearing someone else's name tag. The rest of the evening moved like a cruel play Madeline hadn't auditioned for. Daniel was attentive, to everyone but her. He poured wine for Lila, clapped his junior analysts on the back, and delivered a speech that had the room cheering. But when Madeline tried to hold his hand during a photo, he casually stepped aside to adjust his cufflinks. She sat beside Emery near the dessert table, trying to keep her smile fixed. "Something's off," Emery whispered, watching Lila toss her hair as Daniel leaned in to speak with her again. "That girl's not just ambitious, she's territorial." Madeline nodded slowly but said nothing. The ride home was silent. Daniel scrolled through emails the entire time, and when she asked about the fundraiser's success, he grunted and said, "Lila handled most of the planning. I barely did anything." That night, as he fell asleep quickly beside her, Madeline lay awake in the dark, realizing for the first time that the man she loved might be emotionally investing in someone new. And worse, he didn't think she noticed. The following weeks blurred into an exhausting pattern. Daniel left before sunrise, returned long after Madeline was asleep, and barely offered more than a nod of acknowledgement between their schedules. His late nights, once rare, became the norm, and when she tried to wait up for him, she'd eventually doze off on the couch with the TV still humming. When he did come home, he smelled of expensive cologne and high-rise conference rooms, not the musky trail of subway rides and long hours. Madeline tried not to pry, afraid to seem clingy, but concern clung to her like fog. She started packing his dinner in reusable containers with little handwritten notes. He never acknowledged them. One evening, she even made a homemade lasagna, lit candles, and dimmed the lights, hoping to surprise him. He never showed. At 11:43 p.m., a text came in, "Client dinner ran long. Don't wait up. No sorry. No good night." Just silence, and the slow, quiet erosion of the us she was fighting to preserve. In an attempt to break the cycle, Madeline planned a spontaneous weekend getaway to a secluded cabin near the Berkshires. She booked everything: meals, hiking trails, even a massage package at a nearby spa. She left the itinerary in a gift bag on the kitchen counter with 2 travel mugs and a note that read, "Let's find each other again. This weekend, just us. Love, M." But on Friday morning, Daniel barely glanced at it before saying, "This weekend? That's bad timing. I have a last-minute strategy retreat with upper management." The excuse sliced through her heart like ice. She didn't argue, she simply nodded, cleared the counter, and called the resort to cancel. That same night, while taking out the trash, their neighbor across the hall, a friendly woman named Angela, leaned in conspiratorially and said, "Saw Daniel at the Velvet Saxophone last night. He was looking sharp, dancing with some tall girl in red." Was it a client thing? Madeline froze. She forced a polite smile and nodded vaguely before retreating inside. The Velvet Saxophone was not a corporate venue. It was a downtown jazz bar known for its low lighting, intimate booths, and smooth sax solos. And it wasn't the first time she'd heard that name in passing from Daniel's texts. Something wasn't just off. It was unraveling. Madeline didn't confront him that night. Instead, she sat alone in the bathroom, door locked, scrolling through the photos on her phone, looking for proof that once they had smiled without pretending. She came across an image from their wedding reception, Daniel's hand cupped around her waist, his eyes soft, his lips half pressed against her forehead. How had that man faded so completely into the stranger who now ignored her birthday, avoided eye contact, and answered her questions like they were job interviews? She picked up her journal and tried to write, but the pages remained blank. The silence wasn't healing anymore, it was haunting. Her mother's health was declining fast, and she was juggling appointments, bills, and now doubt. Real, sharp-edged doubt. That night, as she crawled into the cold sheets alone again, she whispered into the dark, "Please, just let it be work. Let it be stress. Let it not be her." But in her gut, Madeline already knew. Daniel wasn't drifting. He was leaving, just slow enough for her to still feel every inch of it. There was a strange kind of cruelty in how Daniel behaved around others, polished, attentive, even charming, while offering Madeline nothing but emotional leftovers. At a neighborhood brunch hosted by Emery's new boyfriend, Daniel arrived 20 minutes late but instantly became the star of the afternoon. He complimented Emery's dress, cracked jokes with the host, and even held a brief conversation with an elderly neighbor about real estate trends. But when Madeline tried to join him at the cocktail table and asked how his week had been, he simply replied, "Busy, same as always," then turned his back to talk with Gregory. From a distance, they still looked like a married couple. He touched the small of her back during pictures and handed her a napkin during the toast, but none of it felt real. It was performance, polished for an audience. Every smile he gave others made the void between them more unbearable. She began wondering what hurt more, his coldness in private, or his warmth toward everyone but her. In a last-ditch effort to reconnect, Madeline planned an intimate dinner at home, just the two of them. She prepared his favorite garlic butter steak with mashed potatoes and wine, even lit the old lavender candles they used to burn while slow dancing in the kitchen. She wore a silk blouse he once said brought out her eyes and played jazz softly in the background. But just as she was setting the table, her phone buzzed with a text, invited some of the team over for a strategy brainstorming dinner. Be there soon. Don't stress. Her heart dropped. She had mentioned the dinner days ago. Still, she didn't argue. She forced a smile, rearranged the table, and cooked extra portions. An hour later, Daniel arrived with 4 colleagues, including Lila, who greeted Madeline with a chirpy, "Your husband says you're the best cook in the world." Madeline plastered on a smile and served them all, retreating quietly into the background. As laughter and ideas flew around the table, she sat at the far end, unnoticed. At one point, Lila poured Daniel another glass of wine and whispered something that made him laugh so hard he nearly choked. Madeline watched it all unfold, invisible in her own home. After everyone left, Daniel barely said thank you. He glanced at her tired eyes and said, "See? That wasn't so bad. You should do this more often." Then he kissed her on the forehead, casual, dismissive, and headed upstairs without looking back. Madeline remained in the kitchen, hands trembling as she cleared the plates, her body heavy with a mix of grief and disbelief. She hadn't spoken a full sentence to him all evening. Gregory, who'd attended the dinner and had lingered behind briefly, had noticed everything. Before leaving, he gently pulled her aside and asked, "Madeline, are you okay?" She nodded instinctively, but her voice caught in her throat. Gregory narrowed his eyes, glancing upstairs before leaning in. "He's slipping," he whispered. And you don't have to pretend it's not happening. Then he walked out. That night, Madeline curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing quietly. She wasn't just lonely, she was watching the love of her life disappear, piece by painful piece, in front of people who didn't even know what they were witnessing. It started as nothing more than a coincidence. Emery had taken a half-day off from work to attend a vendor negotiation near Daniel's office building downtown. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but as she strolled past his glass-walled floor en route to the elevator, she noticed something peculiar. Daniel wasn't at his desk. His team was scattered in conference rooms, yet the lights in his private office were off. Then she saw them, through the frosted partition near the back hallway, the silhouette of two figures standing close. At first, she dismissed it. But then the female figure leaned forward, too intimately, and Daniel's hand reached out, resting briefly on the woman's waist. Emery's eyes narrowed. She moved back, heart-pounding, unsure if her mind had twisted what she saw. But the voice that drifted faintly through the cracked door, Lila's giggle followed by Daniel's low chuckle, confirmed her unease. She didn't want to believe it. Not Daniel. Not to Madeline. Still, she couldn't walk away. That evening, Emery paced in her apartment, torn between silence and truth. Madeline had always been the rock in their friendship, the listener, the calm one, the forgiving one. But Emery knew Madeline was hurting deeply, and this could be the final break. Before acting impulsively, Emery decided to do what she did best, investigate. She called an old acquaintance who worked in Daniel's company's IT department and casually inquired about team changes. Lila Moreno, he asked, laughing. Yeah, she's got the boss wrapped around her finger. Word is they've been working late. Real late. With her pulse racing, Emery scrolled through social media posts, company event photos, and conference check-ins. There were too many instances of Daniel and Lila appearing in the same city, same hour, sometimes even at places Madeline never knew about. Then came the final blow. Emery, using a private browser, accessed a hotel booking portal Daniel had once mentioned during a double date. With trembling hands, she entered Daniel's name and email. The search returned 3 active bookings in different months, each listed under private business escalation with Lila M. as a registered guest. For hours, Emery sat on her couch staring at her phone, rereading the receipts and notes she had scribbled onto a legal pad. Her stomach turned at the thought of telling Madeline, of being the one to confirm what she suspected but still hoped wasn't true. Should she send the evidence? Call her immediately? Or wait until she had absolute proof? Emery decided she needed to see one more thing for herself. She dressed in neutral colors and the next day, positioned herself at the hotel cafe across from Daniel's favorite evening retreat. At precisely 6:42 p.m., she spotted him walking in, shoulders relaxed, laughing. Not alone. Lila was beside him, arm linked with his. They didn't look like colleagues, they looked like two people who had dropped every pretense the moment they were out of public view. Emery pulled out her phone and took the photo, heart aching. Now she had the truth. But would Madeline be ready to see it? Madeline had never expected to return home to betrayal laid out in plain sight, but that's exactly what awaited her after a long, dragging Thursday shift at the firm. Her legs ached from standing all day and her mind swirled with a fog of unresolved thoughts. The moment she arrived at their townhouse, something felt off. The porch lights were off, the flower pots had been moved, and the faint sound of music that usually spilled from Daniel's study was gone. She reached for her keys, but the lock wouldn't turn. Confused, she tried again, jiggled the key, checked to see if she had grabbed the wrong one. But then she noticed it, the lock was different. Changed. Her breath caught as her fingers trembled around the handle. And then she saw it, taped right in the center of the front door, a sheet of white paper, bold black letters staring at her like a slap in the face. We're done. Do not contact me. Her world shifted violently. At first, she thought it was some kind of prank. She knocked, hard, then louder. A neighbor peeked through the blinds, but no one came to the door. She called Daniel. No answer. Again. Voicemail. Again. Straight to voicemail. Heart pounding, she dialed the landlord's number, her voice cracking as she explained she couldn't get into her own house. After a long silence, the landlord sighed. "I wasn't supposed to say anything," he muttered. "But Daniel had the locks changed 2 days ago. Said it was a safety precaution during a personal separation. He showed me a document. I assumed you were aware." Madeline sank onto the porch steps, the cool night air wrapping around her like a shroud. How could he? Without a word? Without a conversation? She stared at her phone, as if willing it to ring, as if hoping this was all some kind of mistake that could be undone. But deep down, she knew, it wasn't just an ending. It was abandonment wrapped in silence. Emery arrived 30 minutes later, after receiving a trembling voice note from Madeline. She brought her blankets, a thermos of ginger tea, and fury in her eyes. As they drove away, Madeline looked through the car window one last time at the townhouse that once held their first Christmas, their burnt anniversary pancakes, their dreams scribbled on sticky notes. All of it, erased without warning. That night, Madeline curled up on Emery's couch, silent. Her phone never rang. Daniel never responded. He had shut a door not just on their home, but on their vows, their memories, and the woman who had stood beside him through every sacrifice. As dawn crept over the skyline, Emery whispered, "You don't have to survive this alone." But Madeline said nothing. Her heart had cracked wide open, and for the first time, she wasn't even sure if she wanted to pick up the pieces. She wasn't just locked out of a house. She had been locked out of her own life. The collapse came quietly, without drama or theatrics. After a sleepless night on Emery's couch, Madeline woke up to the sound of city birds and a pressure in her chest so heavy it made her gasp for breath. She couldn't speak. She couldn't cry. Her body just shook. Emery found her in a fetal position on the floor beside the bathroom, hands gripping her own hair, eyes red and vacant. It was as though all the years she spent holding everything together, Daniel's distance, her mother's illness, her own dwindling sense of self, had combusted into one silent, brutal implosion. Emery called out of work, wrapped Madeline in layers of blankets, and stayed by her side the entire day. When Gregory visited that evening and saw the state Madeline was in, he didn't offer platitudes. He sat beside her, quiet but present. When she finally whispered, "Why didn't I see it coming?" he responded softly, "Because you kept believing love meant waiting longer." Over the next few days, Madeline moved through existence in slow motion. The once meticulous woman who color-coded spreadsheets and labeled pantry jars now forgot to eat, forgot her phone, forgot her name when the pharmacist asked for it. She had only the clothes she was wearing when she was locked out and a small duffel bag Emery had helped her stuff with toiletries. The townhouse she called home had been scrubbed of her presence, photos taken down, clothes discarded, memories boxed up or burned. She didn't even have access to her own bank account anymore. Daniel had blocked her from the joint account and frozen her card. "He's not just cold," Emery growled one morning. "He's calculated." That's when Mr. Aldrich came into the picture again. After hearing what had happened, he visited with warm muffins and paperwork. "You need to claim what's yours, sweetheart," he said gently. "If not for justice, then for closure." He handed her a referral to a legal aid attorney he trusted. Men like Daniel never expect women like you to rise. So rise. By the end of that week, something in Madeline flickered back to life. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't desperation, it was clarity. Daniel had not just discarded her, he had tried to erase her. But she wasn't invisible. Not to Emery. Not to Mr. Aldrich. And certainly not to herself. With shaky hands, she contacted the attorney, explained her situation, and filed for legal access to recover her belongings. The paperwork was painful, but the process gave her direction. She filed for partial restitution of joint property, emergency financial review, and temporary spousal support, even if she didn't know whether she'd follow through. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming her dignity. The next time she walked past the mirror, she didn't avoid her reflection. She looked into her own eyes and saw the first spark of the woman she used to be, tired, yes, but still standing. And somewhere, far away, she hoped Daniel felt the weight of her silence, for it was louder than any scream she could have ever given. Lila Moreno vanished as suddenly as she had arrived. 1 week after Madeline's legal filing, the firm's office buzzed with whispers of her absence, no resignation, no goodbye email, not even a voicemail on the office line. Daniel dodged questions about her with unconvincing shrugs, claiming she took extended leave for personal reasons. But those in close quarters knew something was off. Her office drawers were emptied in a rush, her nameplate removed before noon. Gregory, ever observant, had been keeping tabs since the dinner incident and sensed something darker was beneath the surface. Emery, having already gathered digital breadcrumbs, went digging further. What she found was far more explosive than she anticipated. Lila hadn't just been Daniel's intern. Her real name wasn't even Lila Moreno. It was Juliana Morales, a former compliance executive from an investment firm in Miami, terminated quietly for her role in a high-level embezzlement investigation that was buried before making headlines. And now, she had disappeared again, leaving behind a trail of questions no one could answer. Emery shared the discovery with Madeline, who sat in stunned silence as she processed the deception. She used a fake name, got hired in a top-tier finance firm, and then just disappears? Madeline whispered. Why would Daniel protect someone like that? Emery had her theories, but what she didn't expect was a call that came later that evening, from an anonymous number. The voice was low, shaky. "He knows," the woman said. "He knew everything about Miami. He said he'd protect me if I kept quiet." Then the line went dead. Emery tried calling back, but it was already disconnected. Madeline's heart pounded as the implications widened. This wasn't just about betrayal or infidelity. This was something far more dangerous. That night, Emery's laptop buzzed with a flagged document, an archived case summary linking Juliana Morales to a missing $2.3 million in client funds, the scandal having been internally settled by NDAs and sealed arbitration. And at the center of the settlement? Daniel's name, listed as a third-party advisor who had vouched for her credentials. It was the moment everything clicked into place. Daniel hadn't just emotionally checked out of their marriage, he had been safeguarding a secret that could destroy him. Lila, Juliana, had leverage, and Daniel had played the long game to protect himself, even if it meant dismantling his own home to keep her quiet. Madeline, seated on Emery's couch with legal files spread around her, felt the cold reality seep in. Her marriage wasn't just emotionally abusive, it had become legally entangled in something criminal. Gregory, who joined them that night, stared at the documents in disbelief. "He didn't just break your heart," he said. "He buried you under his lies to keep himself clean." Madeline said nothing. Her gaze drifted to the window where the city lights shimmered beyond the curtain. The man who once knelt in the rain and promised her forever hadn't just chosen someone else. He had chosen corruption. And she was no longer willing to be collateral damage. Just as Madeline was beginning to find her footing in the aftermath of betrayal and revelation, life threw her another twist, one she hadn't seen coming. On a gray Tuesday morning, while sipping tea by Emery's window, Madeline received an official envelope postmarked from Vermont. Inside was a letter from a law firm she didn't recognize, stamped with embossed golden seals and typed in crisp legal language. Her late mother's name was on the first line. Confused, she read on. The letter explained that her mother, Eleanor, had a half-sister named Ruth Ann Lambert, a woman Madeline had never heard of. Ruth Ann had passed away just 6 weeks earlier and, having no spouse or children, had named Madeline as her sole beneficiary. Included in the inheritance, a fully paid-for countryside property in Vermont and an old-fashioned diner called Ruthie's Morning Light, along with its land, permits, and all contents. Madeline blinked, stunned. Her mother had always said she was an only child. Why had this never been mentioned? Emery and Gregory sat with her as she processed the letter in silence. It wasn't just the inheritance, it was the idea that there had been family out there, hidden, quietly watching her life unfold from a distance. The lawyer explained in a follow-up call that Ruth Ann had been following Madeline for years from afar, unable to connect due to a long-standing family rift with Eleanor that was never resolved. In Ruth Ann's final months, she had instructed her legal team to ensure the property would pass to Madeline without condition, believing she would restore its light. There was no mansion, no vast fortune, just a quaint, fading diner in a sleepy Vermont town, a tiny cottage next door, and a legacy of quiet independence. Madeline stared at the photos sent by the law office, leather booths, checkered floors, and a creaky old sign hanging above the diner's wooden door. For the first time in weeks, something stirred in her chest. Not grief. Not fear. But possibility. The decision didn't come overnight. But by the end of that week, Madeline had packed what little she had and left Emery's apartment with a hug, a promise to stay in touch, and a GPS set toward Vermont. The drive was long and pensive, hours of countryside roads, fading city lights, and whispered questions about what her life could look like in this new chapter. When she arrived, the diner sat peacefully beneath the shadow of maple trees, its lights off, windows dusty, but the soul of the place untouched. She stepped inside and inhaled the scent of aged wood, old coffee, and forgotten dreams. A few moments later, a voice startled her, "You must be Madeline." She turned and met Noah Rhodes, the quiet, rugged neighbor who lived on the farm next door, a single father with a daughter in tow, and eyes that carried his own share of sorrow. And just like that, the next part of Madeline's story had quietly begun. It began with the sound of the bell over the door. The first customer to step into Ruthie's morning light in over a year was a farmer named Harriet, who'd driven in from a nearby town after seeing the reopening soon sign Madeline had hung the week prior. By then, Madeline had spent 2 sleepless weeks restoring the diner by hand, scrubbing decades of dust, repainting faded panels, replacing cracked booths, and salvaging antique fixtures with the help of a few kind locals. The diner wasn't perfect yet, but it was breathing again. And so was Madeline. She'd never run a business before, but she approached the process like she had everything in life, delicately but determined. Noah Rhodes, who lived in the farmhouse just beyond the trees, had offered to help after seeing her struggling with a faulty back door hinge. What started as casual conversations while fixing up the place turned into comfortable silences filled with shared coffee, paint-stained fingers, and the soft understanding of 2 people gently mending from life's wreckage. Noah was unlike any man Madeline had known. He was quiet but not distant, thoughtful without needing to be asked. A former Army medic turned organic farmer, he had returned to Vermont after losing his wife, Claire, in a tragic accident 2 years prior. His 6-year-old daughter, Mira, was shy, observant, and immediately drawn to Madeline's warmth. Slowly, the 3 of them developed a rhythm, Noah stopping by with crates of fresh eggs and tomatoes in exchange for pancakes and coffee, Mira drawing chalk hearts on the diner porch while Madeline swept. For the first time in years, Madeline felt herself waking up to joy again, not the kind that crashes in, but the kind that grows in the silence, that blooms like wildflowers between broken cement. The community embraced her, customers returned, and within a month, Ruthie's morning light had become a local favorite again. It wasn't about profit. It was about presence. And for Madeline, that meant everything. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Daniel Campbell's world was beginning to collapse. Word of his association with Juliana Morales had reached the board, and despite his efforts to silence rumors, leaked emails and financial audits uncovered inconsistencies in several client portfolios tied to his department. The firm initiated an internal investigation, and Daniel was quietly placed on leave pending review. The scandal hadn't hit headlines yet, but whispers in the financial district were spreading like wildfire. Emery sent Madeline a clipped news article from a finance blog titled "The Intern, the Cover-Up, and the Collapse." Madeline didn't respond immediately. She read it, then simply closed her phone and went back to clearing tables. She wasn't indifferent, she had simply outgrown the version of herself that would have found closure in his downfall. That night, Noah asked if she wanted to walk the farm trail with him and Mira before sunset. She said yes. And as the sky turned to gold, she realized healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about finally being seen. The fall of Daniel Ethan Campbell didn't come in a single moment. It came in waves, each more damning than the last. First, the firm suspended him without pay. Then came the subpoenas. Internal emails revealed coded language between him and Juliana Morales, Lila, about redirected accounts and client rerouting strategies that financial compliance experts immediately flagged as laundering schemes. Weeks of secrets unraveled publicly, the scandal growing until even industry publications ran headlines like Golden Boy or Ghost Banker. Gregory, who had once admired Daniel's precision, was stunned. He buried himself in ambition and dragged you with him, he told Madeline when they spoke on the phone. Daniel's condo was raided, his bank accounts frozen, and the luxury car he once proudly displayed was towed in broad daylight. But the worst part wasn't the legal carnage, it was the loneliness. Juliana had vanished completely. And when Daniel reached out to his colleagues, most ignored him. His fall from grace wasn't just financial, it was personal and brutal. Madeline didn't rejoice. She observed from a distance, emotionally detached from the chaos. Emery had sent her video footage of Daniel being escorted by federal agents through his firm's marble lobby, his tie askew, his face pale, eyes darting wildly behind dark-rimmed glasses. The man who had once dominated boardrooms with quiet power now looked like a forgotten file folder, crumpled, discarded, obsolete. But Madeline wasn't watching to celebrate. She was watching to confirm what her soul already knew. Sometimes closure doesn't come with apologies or remorse. Sometimes it comes from seeing truth rise unmasked. Back in Vermont, business at the diner was thriving. Customers laughed. Mira brought home a drawing from school titled Me and Miss Maddie. Noah rebuilt her herb garden. And Madeline slept deeper than she had in years. There was no need to shout vengeance into the void. Daniel's life was now the loudest cautionary tale, and Madeline had quietly, gracefully, stepped out of its shadow. One foggy afternoon, while checking her mail behind the diner, Madeline received an envelope postmarked from Boston. No return address. Inside was a court summons. Daniel was being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, falsification of financial documents, and obstruction of regulatory audits. Her name was listed among the witnesses requested to testify. She stared at the document for a long while, then folded it neatly and placed it inside a kitchen drawer beneath the sugar canisters. That evening, she didn't bring it up with Noah as they prepared Myra's favorite lemon pasta or as they played cards on the back porch under the stars. She no longer needed the spotlight to shine on Daniel's wrongs for her to feel whole. She was already living proof that darkness can't dim a woman who learns to build her own light. And Daniel? He wasn't just falling, he was forgotten. And nothing, she realized, felt more liberating than knowing she no longer cared to remember. The letter arrived on a chilly Wednesday morning, tucked between a diner supply invoice and a Vermont community newsletter. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, neat, calculated, and restrained, just like him. Daniel. Madeline stood still, staring at the envelope on the kitchen counter as if it were a dormant mine. She didn't open it, not immediately. Instead, she placed it beside the coffee machine and went about her morning, pouring batter onto the griddle, greeting early customers, and laughing softly at Myra's knock-knock jokes from the corner booth. But all the while, the weight of the letter pressed against her spine. What could he possibly say now? An apology? A justification? A desperate plea for her testimony? When the last table had cleared and the diner door jingled shut for the afternoon, she sat alone at table 6, holding the unopened letter in her hand like it might burn her fingers. Forgiveness had always been her gift, but this time, she wasn't sure it was owed. Gregory arrived unexpectedly just after dusk, holding a bag of pastries from his sister's bakery. He had driven up from Boston to see for himself that Madeline was okay. As they drank cider on the porch, she slid the envelope across the table toward him. "It's from him," she said simply. Gregory picked it up, examined it, then looked at her. "You want me to open it?" Madeline shook her head. "No. I want you to burn it." There was no anger in her voice, just a calm finality that startled even her. Gregory didn't hesitate. He walked over to the rusted fire pit in the yard, struck a match, and dropped the letter in. The flames consumed it instantly, curling the corners until nothing remained but embers and ash. "You sure?" he asked one last time. Madeline nodded. If there's something worth saying, he should have said it before changing the locks. It wasn't about bitterness. It was about drawing a line between then and now, and never crossing back. Later that night, Mira tiptoed into the diner's kitchen, where Madeline was rearranging spice jars and humming softly. "Miss Maddie," she said shyly, "if you married Daddy, would I call you Mommy?" Madeline froze for a moment, tears brimming without falling. She knelt and gently brushed Myra's curls away from her eyes. "You could call me whatever makes your heart happy, Sunshine." The little girl grinned and hugged her tightly, and Madeline realized the warmth she had been starved of for years was blooming again, not through apologies from the past, but through the love being offered now. Upstairs, Noah watched quietly from the doorway, a soft smile on his lips. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that silence, Madeline found everything Daniel had never given her: peace, respect, and the promise of something beautifully, fearfully real. The past had tried to return. But she had burned it. And this time, she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She was already home. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when the past walked back into her life, uninvited, unannounced, and unrecognizably broken. Madeline was behind the counter of the diner wiping down glass syrup bottles when the door chimed, and she looked up to see Daniel standing there. Thinner. Hollow. His once pristine navy coat was wrinkled and too big on him, as if his own life no longer fit. He didn't speak right away. Just stood there, hands trembling, eyes ticking in the diner like it was a foreign world. A few regulars turned and whispered, sensing something strange in the air. Madeline didn't flinch. She placed the towel aside, stepped out from behind the counter, and met his gaze calmly. "You're far from Boston, Daniel." His voice cracked. "I had to see you. Just once." "I had to say," she raised a hand gently. "Don't say it here. Sit down." He obeyed. But this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. They sat at the booth in the back, table 7, the same one where she had once imagined growing old with him, sipping black coffee as the world passed by. Now, he looked like a man unraveling from the inside. He fidgeted with a sugar packet, eyes darting. "You were right," he finally said. "About everything. About her. About me. I lost it all. And I deserve it." Madeline folded her arms. "You didn't just lose a firm or money, Daniel. You lost the one person who believed in you when even you didn't." He nodded, unable to hold her gaze. "I thought control was strength. I thought silence was safety. But all I did was destroy the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." The word stung, but Madeline didn't cry. She had shed all her tears in silence and fire. "I don't hate you," she said. "But I don't owe you anything either. Not closure. Not comfort. Not a second chance." And that truth, more than anything, was what broke him. Daniel asked if they could talk again someday. Madeline stood, looked at him with eyes filled not with anger, but clarity. "You spent years watching me disappear while pretending you didn't see. I won't do that to myself anymore." She walked him to the door, past the customers, past the curious stares, and opened it wide. "Whatever you're looking for, it's not here anymore." As he stepped out into the cold, Noah arrived with Mira in his arms. The little girl waved sweetly at Daniel without understanding who he was. Daniel looked between the child, Madeline, and the man beside her, and then he knew. She had moved on. Not just physically. Entirely. When the door shut behind him, Madeline exhaled, shoulders finally relaxed. She turned to Noah, who gently squeezed her hand. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I am now. Because sometimes closure doesn't come in the answers, it comes in knowing you no longer need them." The town's annual harvest festival arrived with golden skies, crisp apple air, and lanterns hung across the streets like stars suspended by thread. Ruthie's morning light had been invited to host the closing night dinner, and Madeline had poured her entire soul into the menu, decorating the booths with hand-painted signs and autumn leaves Mira collected herself. What Madeline didn't know, what no one had dared whisper, was that Noah had been planning something far more monumental. As the night wore on, laughter echoing under the fairy lights and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting through the breeze, Noah stepped onto the small stage in the town square. Holding Myra's hand, he tapped the mic and cleared his throat. Some people come into your life to teach you. Others, to heal you. But very few arrive when your heart is already broken, and still manage to make it whole. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt and looked directly at Madeline. Will you marry me? For a moment, time slowed. Madeline stood frozen near the cider stand, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide. The crowd gasped, some clapping already, while Mira tugged gently at her apron and whispered, "Say yes, Miss Maddie." Tears rushed to Madeline's eyes, but not from fear. This time, they were born from joy, from witnessing the universe give her something not because she chased it, but because she had finally let go. She walked up to the stage, trembling but smiling, and nodded through the tears. Yes. Yes, I will. The entire square erupted in cheers, and as Noah stood and kissed her hand, Emery rushed forward with Gregory at her side, both of them howling with celebration. I told you the second act of your life would be wild, Emery shouted. Gregory grinned, reaching into his coat. Funny you should say that, he said, pulling out a small ring box. He turned to Emery and dropped to one knee. The crowd lost its breath. A double proposal. It was as if life had decided, in that one single evening, to return everything Madeline thought it had stolen. Gregory and Emery's engagement only made the joy spread wider through the community, two women who had held each other up through tears and survival now embracing futures that once seemed unimaginable. After the event, Daniel's sentencing was announced quietly in a local Boston legal brief: 5 years probation, mandated restitution, and a lifetime ban from financial advisement. He had become a ghost in the city he once ruled. Madeline didn't read the article. It was Gregory who told her, and all she did was nod. That chapter, long closed. She had a wedding to plan. A new family to grow. And a diner full of people who now called her our Maddie. She stood on the porch that night, wrapped in Noah's arms, Mira giggling between them. For the first time in years, the past didn't whisper behind her. It had finally learned to stay quiet. The grand opening of the second branch of Ruthie's Morning Light was a quiet revolution. Nestled in the heart of Brattleboro, just 40 minutes from the original diner, it carried the same soul but with Madeline's fingerprints embedded in every corner, from the hand-sewn cushions to the chalkboard menus that featured daily affirmations and community quotes. Locals filled the booths before sunrise, eager to taste not just food, but the warmth of a story that had bloomed from brokenness. Madeline stood at the back entrance that morning, watching through the glass as Mira helped her father serve pastries and Emery rearranged floral vases on every table. Gregory had built the restaurant's website himself, now managing their books remotely. And Mr. Aldridge, who had passed peacefully just 2 weeks before, had left Madeline the adjoining farmland he had once joked she'd turn into a wedding venue. She wept when she found the deed tucked inside one of his vintage novels, scribbled with a note that read, "You rose. I knew you would." In every way that mattered, Madeline had rebuilt her life from ashes, without noise, without vengeance, and without shortcuts. The woman who once doubted her worth was now a symbol of resilience in the community. Invitations to speak at small business summits arrived weekly, but she declined most, preferring instead to pour coffee, hug old customers, and spend her evenings under maple trees with Noah and Mira. The wedding had been simple: outdoor vows beneath lanterns, handwritten promises, and a communal meal prepared by half the town. Mira called her mama now without hesitation, and Madeline never corrected her. Some mornings, she would walk through the diner before opening, running her hand across the booths, whispering silent gratitude for every moment that had tried to break her but failed. Sometimes healing didn't come in miracles. It came in choices, daily ones, gentle ones, courageous ones. And Madeline had chosen herself, again and again, until life finally chose her back. On the final page of her journal, Grace Notes Volume 5, she wrote the words she once never thought she'd believe: "The door that locked me out led me to the life I deserved." And as the wind carried the scent of cinnamon and maple across the Vermont fields, Madeline stepped outside, her apron dusted with flour, her heart steady. Noah waited by the truck, his hand outstretched, Mira already buckled in, giggling about a picnic they had planned at the lake. As Madeline walked toward them, she didn't carry pain, or shadows, or memories of what could have been. She carried peace. She carried legacy. She carried love. And with one deep breath and a glance at the sun climbing through the trees, she whispered to herself, for the last time, and for the first time, "This is my new beginning." The end.